June 17, 1854. The summer heat hung over Mississippi like a heavy curtain, thick enough to taste in the back of one's throat. On that day, Belmont Manor's grand parlor, usually filled with the chatter of guests, clinking teacups, and the gentle hum of a piano, felt more like a courtroom awaiting a verdict. 15 people sat in rigid silence, each one trying to guess what kind of truth lay inside the sealed document resting in the attorney's hands. James Whitfield, the family attorney for nearly 20 years, stood at the center of the room beside a polished mahogany table. In his grasp was an aged parchment envelope sealed with deep red wax. Impressed into that wax was the Belmont family crest, an oak tree entwined with 2 serpents. Normally, it symbolized strength and legacy, but today it felt more like a threat, a warning that whatever lay inside was coiled and ready to strike. James's fingers trembled, not from age, but from knowledge. He already suspected what the document contained, and he feared the effect it would have. The lantern placed on the sideboard flickered, casting restless shadows that danced across the envelope, then across the silver water pitcher, and finally across the anxious faces of those gathered. Every shifting flame seemed to whisper the same question: "Are you truly prepared to hear this?" Front and center sat Margaret Belmont, the aging matriarch of the estate. Her knuckles tightened around the carved handle of her cane, her lips pressed into a thin white line. Beside her sat her grandsons, Thomas and Edwin, both in their 20s, both pale with apprehension. They were young men raised on wealth and image, but nothing in their upbringing had prepared them for this moment. Behind them sat the estate's overseer, a few longtime household staff members, and 2 legal witnesses required to verify the document's legitimacy. No one spoke. No one moved. It felt as if the entire room was holding its breath, waiting for a blow that everyone sensed coming. James finally lifted his eyes and addressed the group. "Before I open this," he said carefully, "you all must understand that this document was written by Mr. Charles Belmont during his final days. Whatever it contains is fully binding under the law." Margaret's eyes closed for a moment, not in prayer, but in resignation. She already knew her husband had secrets, but she had no idea how deep they ran. James slid the small knife. Beneath the wax, a sharp crack echoed through the room as the seal split. It felt as though the air shifted. He pulled the parchment free and unfolded it with slow, deliberate movements. The moment he read the first line, his face drained of color, confirming that this was not a typical will, nor a simple property division. This was something else, something meant to shatter the Belmont legacy forever. Asterisk. The paper in James Whitfield's hands crackled softly, its edges yellowed by time and the heavy air of a sick man's final hours. He took a steadying breath, though nothing could truly steady him. The words staring back at him were a fuse, and once spoken aloud, there would be no turning back. He lifted his eyes to the room. Margaret Belmont stared at him with a sharp, almost desperate intensity. Her grandsons leaned forward just slightly, though they didn't realize they were doing it. The overseer adjusted his collar, the witnesses sat stiff as fence posts, and the staff members glanced at one another in silent dread. Everyone felt the tension tightening like a rope. Asterisk. James finally read the opening line. Asterisk. This is the sworn and final account of Charles Whitmore Belmont, written in full soundness of mind, concerning the true and concealed inheritance of Belmont Manor. Asterisk. A murmur rose quick, startled, almost choking, before Margaret struck the floor with her cane. Asterisk. Quiet, she snapped. Though her own voice wavered, James continued. It is known publicly that my estate, my fortune, and my legacy shall pass to my lawful bloodline. But the truth, long hidden, demands exposure. The Belmont name has been built not merely on land and labor, but on a secret I have carried for 33 years. Asterisk. The room seemed to shrink around them. Asterisk. Servants exchanged uneasy glances. Thomas shifted uncomfortably. Edwin swallowed hard. No one dared interrupt. James hesitated before reading the next portion, because it changed everything. Asterisk. In the year 1821, before my marriage to Margaret Ellsworth, I fathered a child with a woman whose name I was forbidden to speak. That child has survived into adulthood, and part of this estate, by law and by conscience, belongs to them." The silence that followed was thick enough to choke on. Margaret's eyes widened, not with surprise, but with humiliation. She had suspected her husband of many sins, but nothing that could legally divide the Belmont inheritance. Nothing that could shame the family in front of witnesses. Nothing that could tear down the very foundation she had spent her life defending. Her voice cracked like dry wood. James, this cannot be true. But James could only shake his head. It is his handwriting, his seal, his last instructions. Before he could continue, Thomas rose abruptly from his seat. So you're telling us that some unknown bastard, some stranger, has a claim to our land? Our legacy? Our home? Edwin stood as well, face pale, jaw tight. This has to be a forgery. A trick. My grandfather would never. James raised a hand sharply. Sit down. Both of you. The authority in his tone startled them, but they obeyed. James cleared his throat and read on. This heir is not a stranger. They were raised closer to Belmont Manor than anyone ever realized. Their identity has been hidden by design, by necessity, and by fear. A gasp rippled through the room. Even Margaret's cane slipped from her hand and clattered against the wooden floor. Someone in this room, or someone connected to them, was the Forbidden's child. And Charles Belmont had chosen this moment. From beyond the grave, to unleash the truth. The parlor felt colder now, as if the draft slipping through the antique window panes carried the breath of the dead. No one moved. No one dared. It was as though every soul in the room waited for the next sentence to reveal whether their world was about to break open. James Whitfield steadied his voice and continued reading. The child was raised under another name, under another roof, within sight of this manor, yet never acknowledged, never welcomed through its doors. A pulse of unease traveled through the room. Servants who had lived on the estate for decades traded looks loaded with old memories of rumors, whispered during late-night kitchen shifts, of deliveries made to the small cabins beyond the orchard, of a woman who once lived there and then seemed to vanish without explanation. Margaret gripped the arms of her chair so tightly her knuckles blanched. Her composure was cracking. Piece by piece, James read on. I provided for them in secret, and I ensured their survival when circumstances threatened it. But secrecy became a slow poison. The lie grew larger than the truth, and it is my final wish that the poison end with me. A soft thud broke the silence. The overseer, Mr. Claiborne, had dropped his ledger. His face turned gray, and he didn't bother picking it up. It was clear he knew something. Perhaps he had known for years. Margaret snapped her head toward him. What do you know? She demanded. Claiborne shook his head. Ma'am, it isn't my place, it is your place if you kept secrets from this family, she hissed. Before he could reply, James lifted his hand. There's more, and you all need to hear it before accusations begin. He lowered his gaze to the parchment. My child was born to a woman named Lila Harrow, a woman of quiet strength, kindness, and sharp wit. She lived in the small cottage behind the north orchard. Many of you saw her. Few ever spoke to her. A collective realization swept the room. People remembered Layla, a tall, soft-spoken woman with dark hair and steady eyes. She had arrived on the estate around 1820, supposedly as a seamstress. For a while she was a familiar face, mending clothes, delivering linens, walking the orchard path alone, and then she was gone. No farewell, no explanation, just gone. Some had whispered illness, others had whispered scandal. Now the truth was surfacing. Piece by devastating piece, Thomas spoke quietly, though anger simmered beneath his words. So grandfather hid a mistress on our land? And a child? And none of you said a word? Margaret flinched as if struck. Do not speak of this as if it were common gossip. Your grandfather swore, James interrupted gently. Mrs. Belmont? He swore a great many things. A harsh silence settled again. Finally, James continued. Layla Harrow died when the child was only 8. From that moment forward, the child survived without mother or name. Yet they lived, watched, and worked closer to this estate than any Belmont heir. Someone inhaled sharply. The room understood the implication. The heir was not far, not distant, not a stranger. They were a shadow, living just outside the Grand Manor's walls, a ghost in plain sight. And their identity was about to shatter every lineage, every lie, and every legacy in the room. James held the parchment at the edges, as if afraid the truth might scorch his fingers. Everyone leaned in unconsciously, though fear tugged them in the opposite direction. The air felt thick, and even the lantern flame seemed to steady itself. Waiting, he cleared his throat and read the next lines. After Lila's passing, the child remained on the estate under the guidance of a caretaker whose loyalty cannot be overstated. Their presence was never recorded in household ledgers, never acknowledged in social circles, and never granted the right to the Belmont name. Yet they grew up breathing the same air, walking the same grounds, learning the same land. Margaret whispered, impossible. But the tremor in her voice betrayed her doubt. The staff exchanged uneasy looks. It wasn't impossible. It was believable, painfully. Disturbingly believable. James continued, I arranged for them to be taught reading, numbers, and land stewardship. Not as charity, but as preparation. For they were not meant to live and die in the shadows. They were meant, one day, to stand equal to any Belmont. Thomas scoffed under his breath. Equal? Margaret shot him a glare sharp enough to cut. But James wasn't finished. He read the line that tightened every throat in the room. Their name is Elias Harrow. A. Shock rippled across the parlor. Some gasped. Some froze. And some, like the older staff, lowered their eyes with the quiet resignation of people who had known. Something was wrong for years but hadn't dared to face it. Elias Harrow. The name carried weight. Not because it was known, but because it WSN single quotes. The overseer swallowed hard. Sir, Elias works the stables. Has for years? A jolt went through the Belmont brothers. Thomas turned sharply. What? That boy? The stable hand? James nodded slowly, painfully. Yes, Elias Harrow is Charles Belmont's hidden child. Edwin whispered. That can't be. He's just a farmhand. An orphan. We've barely spoken to him. Margaret finally found her voice, brittle and frayed. James! Tell me, this is some misunderstanding. Tell me my husband wouldn't hide a son behind our home like a shameful secret. James looked at her with tired eyes. I'm afraid he did. Margaret closed her eyes, her chest rising and falling rapidly. She wasn't grieving her husband. She was grieving the life she thought she lived. Every dinner, every gathering, every moment they had pretended to be a model Southern family was now cracking apart like thin porcelain. But the document went further. James forced himself to read. Elias Harrow has reached the age where he must be acknowledged. I leave him 1/3 of all Belmont lands, and the legal right to reside in Belmont Manor as my rightful heir. The room erupted. No, this is madness. He can't. Not a stable hand. Voices collided. Heated, panicked, furious, Margaret slammed her palm on the table. Silencing them, James lifted the parchment again. There is still more, he warned. And you all need to hear it. The room grew still. The worst was not yet spoken. For several long seconds, the only sound in the parlor was the ragged breathing of 15 people trying to absorb a truth too large to swallow. The name Elias Harrow still floated in the air like smoke from a gunshot, sharp, undeniable, and capable of wounding. James Whitfield waited for the uproar to die down. He knew that the next part of the letter would detonate an even harsher explosion. And he braced himself accordingly. Asterisk Thomas Belmont was the first to speak, his voice thick with outrage. Asterisk, you mean to tell us that a stable hand, a boy who mucks stalls and sleeps above the tack room, owns 1/3 of our land? He is nothing. He has no right. Margaret's hand cracked against the arm of her chair. Thomas, enough. Asterisk, but Thomas wasn't finished. Rage had hollowed his restraint. Asterisk, he's been eating from our kitchen, living off our estate, working under our oversight, and all this time he couldn't even finish the sentence. Edwin stepped forward, more quietly but far more dangerously. Asterisk, where is he now? Has anyone told him? Does he know he's been walking around with the Belmont name in his blood? The staff shifted nervously. Mr. Claiborne, the overseer, cleared his throat. Elias is in the north barn, tending the horses. He has no idea about any of this. As far as I know, he believes he's nothing more than an orphan who got lucky enough to earn honest work. Margaret flinched. James tapped the parchment gently with his finger. Elias Harrow is not just a worker, not just a name hidden behind the orchard. He is Charles Belmont's son. His first son, legally conceived before your marriage, Mrs. Belmont. He hesitated, and that gives him a legitimate claim. Margaret wiped at her eyes with trembling fingers. I am not angry at Elias, she whispered. I am angry that my husband lived a double life, that he chose lies over dignity, secrets over honesty, shame over courage. James softened his voice. He knew you would feel betrayed. That's why he kept silent until the end. Asterisk Margaret looked up sharply. And now he expects me to open my home, my family home, to a stranger? James swallowed. Yes, because the document leaves no choice. Asterisk Thomas erupted again. It leaves every choice. We can contest it. Challenge it. Burn it if we must. Asterisk, no one is burning anything. James said firmly. Asterisk, he knew what came next in the document, and he dreaded speaking it aloud. He lifted the parchment and read, I warn my heirs. Any attempt to destroy, conceal, or challenge this document will result in the immediate transfer of the entire estate to federal trustees. My true heir, Elias Harrow, will receive legal priority regardless of opposition. A stunned silence. James continued. Asterisk, furthermore, should any harm come to Elias intentionally, or otherwise, those responsible will forfeit all claims to the Belmont inheritance. Asterisk, this time the silence wasn't shock, it was fear. Thomas stepped back as though the words were a physical blow. Edwin's jaw clenched so tightly the muscle twitched. Margaret pressed a hand to her heart. Asterisk Claiborne whispered, he protected the boy even after death. Asterisk James nodded slowly. He did. Asterisk the parlor felt smaller, darker, as if the walls themselves were leaning in, listening. Asterisk, and then James closed his eyes and read the final line of the page. Asterisk, there is one last truth, a danger tied to Elias. The manor and the night Leila Harrow died. What happened in that cabin must finally come to light. A chill crept through the room. Everyone understood immediately. Asterisk, this was no longer just about inheritance. Asterisk, it was about something far darker. Asterisk, something that had been buried for years, something ready to surface. The afternoon sun slanted through the tall windows of the Belmont Manor parlor, throwing long shadows across the floorboards. Dust motes danced in the beams like silent witnesses. No one spoke immediately after James finished reading the final line. The weight of the revelation pressed down on every shoulder, demanding acknowledgement. Margaret finally broke the silence, her voice low, trembling. Years. All these years, and no one has told me. No one spoke a word. Her gaze wandered to the velvet curtains as if expecting them to answer. And yet we all lived in the same house, breathing the same air. Asterisk Thomas scowled, pacing the room with restless energy. It's preposterous. A secret child of my father's, hidden in the shadows, raised by strangers, and we're just supposed to accept it? Who knows what mischief he could cause? Asterisk Edwin's face remained impassive, but his hands tightened into fists. He had always prided himself on measured thought, But the news threatened to dismantle the foundation of reason he relied upon. Consider, he said carefully, that this is not mere mischief. This is a claim rooted in law, supported by documentation. If we ignore it, we risk losing everything: the estate, our authority, our name. Margaret shivered, glancing toward the far corner where the fireplace sat cold and empty. That hearth had once been a symbol of warmth and stability, a place of gathering for generations. Now it felt like a threshold to something else, a conduit to shadows, to secrets that had lain dormant too long. Claiborne, the longtime overseer, shuffled closer. His voice was almost a whisper. "I've served the Belmonts for more than 30 years. I've seen the truth creep slowly through the cracks. Elias Harrow, he is no ordinary boy. There's something in him, something your father recognized and protected. Perhaps more than we know, perhaps more than we can yet comprehend." James leaned on the arm of a chair, smoothing the edges of the parchment. He understood the weight of the room, the invisible tension that pressed down as though the walls themselves were closing in. Every person there, whether by blood or duty, understood that a new chapter had begun. One that would change the course of their lives forever? Margaret's voice trembled again. "What happened to Layla? Why is her death tied to him?" Thomas froze. The room seemed to darken further. He remembered the whispers, the nights of unanswered questions, the chill that never left him after his sister's passing. No one had dared speak it aloud, but it was there, unspoken, omnipresent, a shadow lurking in the corners. Edwin finally stepped forward. "We will know soon enough," he said, his tone decisive. "James, we need to locate Elias before anyone else does. If my father's instructions are to be honored, he must be found, protected, and guided. The night of Lila's death, whatever truths it holds, must be faced. The estate, the family, everything depends on it." Margaret straightened, her shoulders stiff with resolve. "Then we begin now. There is no more waiting, no more silence." Claiborne nodded silently. "I will lead you to the barns. He is there, tending to the horses, unaware of the storm about to descend upon him." The room seemed to pulse with anticipation. Every creak of the floorboards, every breath of wind through the shutters, whispered warnings of what was to come. Outside, the garden remained serene, a perfect mask over the turmoil within. James collected the letters and documents, securing them beneath his coat. Every line, every phrase, every hidden warning felt alive, a thread connecting the past to the present, pulling them toward a confrontation that had been decades in the making. Margaret's eyes met James's. "Whatever is waiting for us, we face it together. This is our family now. The truth is our inheritance." And with that, the group moved toward the barn, each step echoing through the manor like a drumbeat of destiny. The air grew colder as they approached, carrying with it the scent of hay, horses, and the faint trace of something older, something buried in memory. Waiting for recognition, outside, the wind rustled through the trees, whispering secrets of a night that had never been fully understood. Inside, shadows stretched longer, reaching for the truth that could no longer be denied. The barn stood at the edge of the property, half hidden by a copse of gnarled oak trees. Its timbers were weathered, streaked with decades of rain and sun, but it had endured. The scent of hay and horse sweat hung thick in the air, mingling with the faint, lingering aroma of smoke from the manor's chimneys. James led the group, the letters and documents still clutched tightly in his hand. Every step measured, deliberate. Margaret followed close behind, her breath shallow, eyes scanning every shadow as though the walls themselves might conceal movement. Thomas lagged, muttering under his breath, and Edwin's gaze was sharp, calculating. Claiborne walked ahead, his familiarity with the property guiding them silently. As the group entered the barn, they were met with an unusual stillness. No horses stirred. No hay rustled. Even the air seemed to hold its breath. James signaled for the group to pause. "Stay quiet. He might sense us." From the far corner, a faint rustling drew their attention. There, amidst stacks of old crates and hay bales, a boy appeared. Young, wiry, and alert, with eyes that flickered like a storm at sea. Elias Harrow. His presence was quiet but commanding. There was a maturity in his posture, an intensity in his gaze that suggested he had grown up knowing danger and secrets far beyond his years. Asterisk. Margaret stepped forward cautiously. Elias. Her voice was gentle, almost pleading. We're here to help you. You're part of the Belmont family, and there are truths you need to know. Asterisk. Elias's eyes narrowed, studying them. The Belmonts? His voice was calm but tinged with suspicion. I don't understand. I've been told I am alone. That the world outside doesn't care for me. That Edwin stepped closer, hands raised in a gesture of peace. You are not alone anymore. Your life has been hidden for protection, but now it is time to know who you are. There are forces moving against you, and we must act before it's too late. Asterisk. The boy's gaze softened slightly, though wariness remained. He had survived by knowing threats and anticipating deception, but something about their urgency was undeniable. He stepped forward, allowing himself to be seen fully, revealing a presence that was more commanding than any of them expected. Asterisk. Claiborne cleared his throat. He is ready, but cautious. Do not push too hard. He has lived by his own rules, and any misstep could drive him away. Asterisk. Margaret nodded, her hand brushing the parchment James held. The papers felt heavier now, like a weight that carried the burden of generations. We need to tell him everything, she said, voice steady. The estate, the letters, Lila, the danger that follows. He deserves to know. Asterisk. Elias studied each of them in turn, measuring trust, gauging intent. Finally he spoke, voice low but firm. If what you say is true, then I must see it for myself. I need to understand what my life has been and what I am now expected to face. Asterisk. Thomas scowled. This will not be easy. He's been alone for years. His instincts, they're sharpened by isolation. Asterisk. Elias stepped fully into the dim light of the barn, revealing the sharp intelligence and cautious defiance that defined him. I've survived this long on my own, he said. But if there's truth in your words, then I will listen. But know this, if deceit touches me, I will not forgive. Asterisk. Margaret exchanged a glance with James. They both knew this moment was pivotal. Every secret, every hidden truth would be revealed soon, and the choices made here could either bind them together or fracture the fragile trust being extended. Asterisk. The wind outside whispered against the barn walls, carrying the scent of rain and the faint echo of the manor behind them. In that moment, Elias Harrow stepped into a world he had never known, a world filled with family, secrets and dangers that awaited his understanding and courage. Asterisk. The manor loomed in the distance, its shadow stretching long over the fields as the sun dipped below the horizon. Its windows reflected the fading light, almost like watchful eyes, silently observing every movement below. Elias walked cautiously. Now flanked by James and Margaret, the letters still pressed close to James's chest. The path leading to the front doors was overgrown, the stone steps cracked and slick with moss. Every creak and groan of the weathered timber felt amplified in the evening silence. Asterisk. Margaret broke the quiet, her voice low but urgent. We have to be careful. The estate is more than it seems. Every corridor, every room carries whispers. You must remember that, Elias. Asterisk. He nodded, but his eyes were fixed on the looming structure ahead. He could feel it, the energy, the presence of things unseen yet palpably close. The manor was alive with memory, and it demanded recognition. Asterisk. As they entered the main hall, the air shifted. Dust motes floated lazily through the golden light from the tall windows, catching on cobwebs that stretched like lace across the corners. Portraits lined the walls, their subjects staring down with solemn eyes that seemed to follow them. Elias's gaze lingered on each one, sensing the weight of legacy and secrets. Asterisk. James approached a large, ornate fireplace, brushing dust from a carved mantel. This manor has been home to our family for generations, he said, voice echoing softly. And in its walls, many truths have been buried, waiting for the right moment to surface. Asterisk from the corner, a faint shuffle interrupted their attention. A small, elderly woman appeared, her back bent with age, hands trembling slightly as she carried a lantern. She looked at Elias, and for the first time, recognition sparked in her eyes. Asterisk, finally, she whispered. The boy. You've come. Asterisk, Elias stepped forward cautiously. Who are you? His voice was steady, controlled, but tinged with curiosity. Asterisk, the woman's lips trembled as she spoke. I was a caretaker. For your father's secrets? For the estate? For you? She paused, searching for the right words. You were hidden because there were those who would take everything from you, everything your family fought to protect. Asterisk, Margaret stepped closer, her hand on Elias's shoulder. It's time you understand the danger and the responsibility that comes with it. The estate is more than property, it's a legacy, and it has enemies who will stop at nothing. Asterisk, Elias absorbed her words, feeling the weight settle over him. He had survived alone for so long, trusting no one, relying only on instinct. Now, he was being thrust into a world of shadows and histories he didn't fully comprehend. Asterisk, the old caretaker, led them through a narrow corridor lined with portraits of grim-faced ancestors. Each step echoed through the halls, revealing hidden panels and secret compartments. These halls remember everything, she said softly. Every betrayal, every loyalty, they hold the power to guide or destroy. Asterisk, Elias glanced at James and Margaret, a mixture of determination and caution in his expression. He understood that the secrets of the manor weren't merely relics of the past, they were living forces that could shape the present. Asterisk, a sudden draft swept through the hall, causing the lantern to flicker. Shadows danced across the walls, stretching the faces of the portraits into grotesque forms. Elias's heart quickened. He knew instinctively that this night was only the beginning. Asterisk, the secrets of the Belmont Manor, buried for decades, were ready to reveal themselves. And with Elias now in the center of it all, the past would confront the present, testing courage, loyalty, and the fragile trust that had been so carefully extended. Asterisk, the hidden study at the back of the manor, was small, almost claustrophobic, but it radiated an aura of importance. Dust-laden shelves lined the walls, crammed with volumes of ledgers, journals, and brittle pamphlets. Elias moved carefully, aware that even a small misstep could disturb something crucial. The air smelled faintly of ink and decayed paper, a scent that carried the weight of secrets accumulated over decades. Asterisk, James reached for a heavy ledger, its leather cover cracked and worn. This is what they left behind, he said, voice low. Every transaction, every arrangement, every lie, recorded here. If we can make sense of it, we can understand not just the estate's history, but the forces that shaped it and still shape it. Asterisk, Margaret adjusted the lantern to illuminate the pages. Be careful, she warned. Some of this is dangerous knowledge. People have lost their lives over less. Asterisk, Elias leaned closer, scanning the ledger. Names, dates, and sums of money sprawled across the pages, each line a thread in a web he was only beginning to unravel. Certain names recurred, some familiar, others obscure. Yet the handwriting carried a weight commanding, deliberate, almost obsessive. Asterisk, this mentions the expedition, Elias murmured, pointing to an entry dated decades earlier. And the disappearance. Look, these initials repeat here and here. It's like someone was tracking every step of every person involved. Asterisk, James nodded. Exactly, they weren't just keeping property records. They were mapping influence, control, and secrets. Everything that mattered to the family. Asterisk, Margaret pulled a smaller journal from the shelf, bound in worn blue leather. Its edges were frayed, but the ink inside remained dark, legible. She handed it to Elias. This is different, she said. It reads like a personal account rather than a ledger. Someone was documenting events as they happened? Their thoughts, their fears, their strategies? Whoever wrote this wanted it remembered accurately or feared it would be discovered. Asterisk, Elias opened the journal, and immediately the voice of the past became present. The entries were meticulous, careful, revealing not only dates and transactions but intentions, manipulations, and subtle threats. He felt a chill as he read. The author knew that power was fleeting, that alliances were fragile, and that betrayal was often rewarded in ways that history would barely acknowledge. Asterisk hours passed as they sifted through the layers of records. Each discovery painted a clearer picture of the manor's tangled past. Betrayal intertwined with loyalty, greed entwined with honor, and violence quietly threaded through generations. Elias realized the family's legacy was not just wealth and property, but control over information, over who could live, who could fall, and who would remain hidden. Asterisk, a sudden knock at the study door startled them. They froze, hearts pounding. No one should have known they were here. Margaret held up a finger. The knock came again, soft, almost hesitant. Asterisk, James exchanged a wary glance with Elias. "We're not alone," he whispered, "and whatever comes next. It's not just about the past. They're watching, and they've always been watching." Asterisk, Elias's eyes darted across the room, landing on the ledger and the journal. The truth was here, if they could survive long enough to piece it together. Somewhere in these pages, the story of the manor's most dangerous secrets waited, daring them to confront it. Asterisk, and in that moment Elias understood. The ledger was not just a record. It was a key. Asterisk.
The night was unusually still, as if the city itself were holding its breath. Gas lamps flickered along Royal Street, casting long, wavering shadows across the cobblestones. In the Delacroix mansion, the atmosphere was taut with anticipation. Charles Delacroix had grown increasingly erratic, pacing the parlor with a drink in hand, his eyes darting toward the front windows as though expecting the world to collapse around him at any moment. Isabelle Delacroix moved quietly through the corridors, gathering the children's clothing and personal effects. She was pale, lips pressed tight, and spoke in whispers to the maids, who followed obediently, fear etched into their faces. Every trunk, every chest, every small piece of furniture seemed to carry the weight of a secret too dangerous to reveal. Downstairs, the servants worked methodically, carrying heavy trunks to waiting carriages. The sounds of hooves striking the street echoed faintly, mixing with the muffled rustle of cloth and the occasional creak of wood. No one spoke above a whisper. Every step, every glance, every breath felt measured, calculated. Charles Delacroix paused at the front hall mirror, staring at his reflection. The man who had commanded sugar plantations and wielded influence over New Orleans society now looked smaller, diminished by fear. He knew what had been lost. The pearl was gone, and with her his leverage, his financial certainty, and perhaps his very safety. His family's secrets were fragile, and in the wrong hands, ruinous. Outside, the night deepened. A faint mist began to curl along the edges of the street. The river, usually audible even from the mansion's rear gardens, was eerily quiet. The city seemed suspended between moments, a liminal space where time slowed and decisions were sharpened into irreversible edges. Suddenly, a lantern appeared in the street. Louis Villers, calm and determined, guided the vessel carrying Elellanena Reynolds to safety. Her face was serene, composed, yet beneath that calm lurked the tension of years of confinement and fear. Every step of this escape had been carefully orchestrated, a delicate balance of timing, trust, and courage. One misstep could unravel everything. Inside the mansion, Charles Delacroix's private secretary and plantation manager moved like shadows, preparing to follow orders they barely understood. They were unaware that they had been chosen for roles that would cost them their lives. Every action, from moving trunks to securing rooms, was part of a plan that neither foresaw entirely, an unseen strategy orchestrated by the alliance of Elellanena and Louis Villers. By midnight, the house was emptied of most human presence, yet alive with tension. The remaining occupants felt the silent threat in the air, the sense that something irreversible was about to occur. The faint creak of a floorboard, the whisper of a closing door, the distant echo of a carriage, all converged into a single unspoken certainty that no one in this house would emerge unchanged by 2 a.m. The mansion was a ghost. The Delacroix family had vanished. Their departures were methodical, precise, leaving behind only traces. Clothing hung neatly in wardrobes, meals uneaten on tables, and the faint smell of burning candles. It was as though the house had exhaled its human occupants in a single, orchestrated breath. And outside, along the quiet riverbanks, Elellanena Reynolds looked back once, eyes sharp with resolve. She had reclaimed not only her freedom but her destiny, setting into motion a series of events that would leave the Delacroix family forever erased from the history of the city they once dominated. The night held its secrets close, but history would remember the ripple of that evening, the disappearance, the escape, and the silent assertion of power by a woman who had been sold, controlled, and almost destroyed, yet refused to remain silent. In the days following the Delacroix family's disappearance, New Orleans awoke to a city both familiar and unsettlingly changed. The streets remained bustling with commerce and chatter, yet beneath the ordinary rhythm lurked whispers. People speculated, fingers pointed in private corners, and the weight of unspoken knowledge hung over Royal Street like a thick fog. The sudden vanishing of such a prominent family was impossible to ignore, yet even the police seemed constrained by unseen pressures. Detective James Morrison had been assigned to the case, and he worked diligently, though his frustration grew by the hour. Interviews with servants yielded only fragmented accounts. Trunks had been carried out in silence, carriages departed under cover of night, and the children were gone. Attempts to trace the family's route north or along the river were largely futile. Boats docked and departed daily, yet no reliable sightings were ever confirmed. Evidence, as though by design, had been meticulously erased. Meanwhile, Elellanena Reynolds and Louis Villers had vanished from New Orleans society, leaving only a trail of speculation and rumor. Some claimed to have glimpsed them on riverboats heading for Havana. Others whispered of secret passages leading beyond the city's boundaries. No letters, no dispatches, no public notice betrayed their plans. It was as though they had been swallowed by the night, leaving a void filled with questions and unease. At the Delacroix mansion itself, the air remained thick with traces of human presence, abandoned meals, books left open, and the faint scent of lingering perfume. It was a house frozen in time, a stage on which a drama had concluded in silence. Local children dared each other to peek through the windows, claiming they heard cries, the clash of objects, and even the echo of a woman's triumphant laughter. Adults dismissed these accounts, yet few ventured inside, deterred by an intuition of danger, as if the walls themselves bore witness to crimes and secrets too potent to be challenged. 2 weeks later, the first physical evidence of the Delacroix family's fate emerged. In the swampy lands outside the city, hunters and scavengers discovered 2 bodies. One was immediately identifiable as the private secretary, the other, the plantation manager from Beau Refuge. Both had been executed with precision, a single gunshot to the head, methodical and calculated. The simplicity of the execution style suggested professional intervention, yet no fingerprints, no traces of struggle beyond the act itself, could be recovered. Meanwhile, the river, ever patient and unyielding, held its secrets. Whispers suggested that the bodies of Charles and Isabelle Delacroix had been similarly dispatched and weighted before submersion. Boats that had traversed the Mississippi carried their hidden cargo silently, leaving behind no trace for months, years, or perhaps decades. The water had become a participant, a silent accomplice, preserving secrets beneath its murky surface while the city above carried on with the monotony of commerce and social maneuvering. Local newspapers speculated feverishly, though with little substance. Some claimed that Louis Villers had orchestrated an elaborate plot to eliminate threats. Others hinted at occult involvement, voodoo rites, or the direct hand of Elellanena herself. In the absence of evidence, imagination filled the void, and the city became both witness and conspirator in the unfolding legend. By the summer of 1842, the Delacroix mansion had become a near-permanent ghost. Agents sent to investigate debts and unpaid accounts found empty rooms, intact furniture, and a meticulous order that suggested neither haste nor panic. Whoever had orchestrated the disappearance had ensured that the house itself would raise no alarm until the river and time would reveal the truth or bury it forever. The Delacroix mansion remained empty and silent for decades, its grandeur slowly succumbing to dust and neglect. Windows grew grimy, paint peeled, and the once vibrant gas lamps no longer illuminated the hallways. Local children whispered about the house, telling stories of ghostly lights and the sound of footsteps that echoed in the darkened corridors. Few adults dared enter, and the property became an enigma, a physical reminder of the unsolved mysteries surrounding the Delacroix family and the Pearl, Elellanena Reynolds. It was not until 1962, during a major renovation undertaken by a historical preservation society, that the first tangible clue emerged. Behind a panel in the Grand Library, workers discovered a concealed room, small and windowless, with the scent of aged leather and earth pervading the air. The doorway, carefully hidden, had eluded the casual observer for over a century. Inside, the room contained a collection of artifacts that would forever alter the understanding of the Delacroix case. At the center lay a leather-bound journal, the cover worn but intact, its pages filled with the precise, elegant handwriting of Elellanena Reynolds herself. The entries chronicled months of confinement, fear, and strategy, offering a first-hand account of the years she spent as a ward of the Delacroix estate. Each line revealed her keen intellect, her understanding of social hierarchies, and her growing awareness of the power she might claim over her own destiny. It was a voice both strong and vulnerable, articulate yet tinged with the desperation of someone navigating a world determined to erase her. Nestled alongside the journal were 3 human finger bones, remarkably preserved, the significance of which was initially unclear. Anthropologists later determined that the remains likely belonged to a male who had died roughly around the time of the Delacroix disappearances in 1842. Though DNA testing decades later could not fully identify the bones, the evidence suggested they were connected to the violent events that had transpired in early February of that year. The room itself felt deliberately designed as a repository, a private archive of secrets that no one was meant to find. The room was more than a repository of artifacts. It was a deliberate act of memory preservation. Whoever had arranged these items, likely Elellanena herself, had sought to create a record that bridged the gap between her captivity and her eventual liberation. The room offered a silent witness to years of intrigue, moral ambiguity, and survival in a society designed to erase her existence. In the years that followed, the hidden room became a focal point for historians, anthropologists, and cultural preservationists. It illuminated the lengths to which individuals in the 19th century would go to manipulate identity, conceal evidence, and maintain control over wealth and power. Yet it also bore testimony to resilience, intelligence, and an unwavering commitment to self-determination. The discovery of the hidden room redefined the story of Elellanena Reynolds, transforming her from a whispered legend into a documented historical figure whose actions rippled far beyond the confines of the Delacroix estate. It became a touchstone for discussions of justice, inheritance, and racial hierarchy, reminding all who studied it that the past often hid its truths behind layers of secrecy and time. The journals found in the hidden room became the centerpiece of historical inquiry. Elellanena Reynolds' meticulous records revealed much more than her personal survival. They chronicled a network of alliances, betrayals, and subtle acts of rebellion that shaped the Delacroix estate and the surrounding community. Every page, every margin note, painted a complex picture of power dynamics in early 19th century Louisiana. Scholars had assumed that Elellanena was a passive victim, a pawn trapped by circumstance, but her writings told a different story. She had been calculating, observant, and often one step ahead of her captors. One recurring theme in her entries was the manipulation of social appearances. Elellanena carefully detailed which visitors could be trusted, which servants were likely to leak information, and which neighbors were complicit in the Dell'Acqua family's secrecy. She documented conversations she overheard in the grand hallways, using them as evidence to predict future moves and plan her own strategies. Every seemingly innocuous detail, from the timing of horse arrivals to the pattern of candlelight in the library, became a piece of intelligence she would later leverage to reclaim her autonomy. Her account also revealed a nuanced understanding of law and inheritance. Though young, she studied legal documents, wills, and property records, noting discrepancies and vulnerabilities in the estate's management. She even devised hypothetical scenarios, imagining confrontations with lawyers and officials who might challenge her claim to the family fortune. Her keen intellect suggested that her eventual ability to navigate the court system and assert ownership over property was no mere coincidence. It was the culmination of years of observation and study, painstakingly documented in these journals. Yet the journals were not all strategy and scheming. Elellanena wrote candidly about fear, loneliness, and the psychological toll of her confinement. She described nights when the walls of the hidden room seemed to close in on her, when the whispers of servants or the faint creak of the stairs would trigger waves of anxiety. She recorded moments of quiet rebellion, a book hidden under the mattress, a letter passed to a trusted confidant, a coded message left in plain sight. Each act was small, almost imperceptible, yet collectively they revealed a subtle, persistent resistance to the world that sought to control her. Significantly, Elellanena also reflected on morality and identity. She questioned the ethics of the Dell'Acqua family's treatment of others, particularly enslaved people and vulnerable wards of the estate. She expressed a desire not just to survive, but to enact change, to claim her inheritance in a way that honored truth and justice. Her words suggested an internal struggle, how to balance self-preservation with the moral imperative to act against injustice. Historians quickly realized that these journals were more than a personal diary. They were a lens into the mechanisms of power, control, and resistance in antebellum Louisiana. Each entry was meticulously cross-referenced with property records, court documents, and newspaper archives, revealing a narrative that validated some historical assumptions while overturning others. By the time the journals were fully transcribed, Elellanena Reynolds had emerged not just as a survivor, but as a figure of profound intelligence, courage, and strategic vision. Her writings transformed a story once dominated by rumors and conjecture into a richly detailed historical account, providing insights into social hierarchy, inheritance law, and the ways marginalized voices could navigate oppressive structures. By early 1842, the tension surrounding Elellanena Reynolds reached its apex. The months of careful planning, observation, and subtle manipulation of events culminated in a series of coordinated actions that would finally secure her freedom and alter the trajectory of several powerful families in New Orleans. Her disappearance from Beau Refuge Plantation and subsequent movements had been carefully orchestrated, leaving no immediate trail for the Dell'Acqua family, who had once claimed her as property, to follow. The Mardi Gras ball at the St. Louis Hotel marked a turning point. Attending in the midnight blue gown that had once seemed to belong exclusively to the world of wealth and privilege, Elellanena appeared not as a ward or a victim, but as a poised, self-assured woman, visible evidence of her own agency. Her presence with Louis Villers, the heir to a complex inheritance, stunned the social circle and threw Charles Dell'Acqua into visible agitation. Eyewitness accounts noted the subtle but unmistakable shift in power. Elellanena was no longer someone to be maneuvered or controlled. Her calculated public appearance conveyed both triumph and warning. She had returned not for revenge, but to assert her claim and leverage her position in negotiations, both social and financial. The days following the ball were critical. While the city buzzed with speculation, Elellanena and Louis Villers arranged for the Delacroix family's disappearance to prevent any further claims or obstruction to her rightful inheritance. Historical evidence, including letters and later forensic discoveries, indicates that Charles and Isabelle Delacroix, along with 2 male associates, were eliminated in a meticulously planned act of retribution and self-preservation. The precision of the killing's execution, style gunshot wounds, bodies weighted and submerged in the river sea, suggests professional execution rather than impulsive violence. The intent was clear: to remove the threats to Elellena's freedom while ensuring the safety of any innocents, notably the Delacroix children, who were separated and relocated to Cuba under the supervision of Martha Bernard, a trusted servant referenced throughout Elellena's journals. This period of disappearance also involved strategic deception. Delacroix's estate was abandoned in a manner designed to suggest sudden flight or debt avoidance, leaving behind clothing, food, and everyday items to give the illusion of an unplanned departure. The thoroughness of the plan demonstrates Elellena's understanding not only of human behavior, but also of the logistics of control, how absence and misdirection could protect her future and shield the innocent from harm. Their escape to France was facilitated through official channels but cloaked in subterfuge. Passenger manifests show Elellanena listed ambiguously, reflecting both her desire to avoid detection and her acute awareness of the dangers posed by authorities or opportunistic creditors. Louis Villers' correspondence during this period reveals a carefully constructed legal and social strategy, ensuring that once they left New Orleans, Elellena's claim to freedom and inheritance would be recognized privately if not publicly, insulating her from the consequences of her actions. While maintaining the veneer of propriety, upon arrival in Europe, Elellena's life transitioned from survival to stability. Freed from the immediate dangers of her past, she assumed a new identity while retaining connections to her family heritage and legal claims. Letters, census records, and artifacts preserved in European archives document her existence as Elellanena Villers, wife of Louis Villers, mother, and a woman whose intelligence and resolve had dictated her extraordinary life. The careful choreography of her escape, the protection of the Delacroix children, and the reclamation of her rightful inheritance all point to a person who had mastered both social cunning and moral clarity, a rare combination in any era, but particularly remarkable within the constraints of antebellum Louisiana society. Elellena's final acts of subterfuge and strategic decision making not only secured her future but also cemented her legacy as a woman who refused to be defined by the social, racial, or legal limitations imposed upon her. Her story embodies both the human cost of oppression and the capacity for agency, resilience, and calculated action that allows individuals to transcend it. Elellanena Villers' life after her escape from New Orleans became a study in both transformation and legacy. Settled in France with Louis Villers, she not only maintained the wealth she had claimed, but also carefully cultivated a reputation that was equal parts mystery and admiration. Unlike many women of her era, whose identities were confined to their marriages and family obligations, Elellanena navigated a complex social and political landscape with extraordinary precision, ensuring that her past never compromised her present. Letters preserved in French archives reveal a woman deeply engaged in philanthropy, education, and the arts, suggesting that her ambitions extended beyond mere survival or vengeance. She became a silent architect of change, influencing circles of power subtly, often behind the veil of societal norms that would have otherwise constrained her voice. Historians examining the antebellum South and European immigrant communities often point to Elellanena as a rare example of agency in a period dominated by rigid hierarchies. She left behind no direct memoirs intended for publication, but her correspondence with Louis and carefully curated legal documents allow modern scholars to reconstruct her strategies and mindset. Her attention to detail, her meticulous planning of the Delacroix family's removal, and her secure relocation to Europe illustrate a level of strategic thinking that was almost unparalleled for women of her time. In many ways, she embodies both the tragedy of oppression and the triumph of intellect and determination. Her legacy is also tangible in the fates of those connected to her story. The Delacroix children, relocated and educated in Cuba, became examples of a complex morality in action. Innocence shielded from the consequences of their parents' deeds, yet indelibly shaped by the decisions of Elellanena and Louis. The Reynolds estate, once the center of exploitation and manipulation, transformed into a symbol of reclamation, demonstrating that power could be both asserted and wielded responsibly. While some contemporaries viewed her actions as morally ambiguous, modern assessments frequently frame them as acts of survival and justice within a legal and social system that offered her few legitimate avenues of empowerment. Elellena's influence persisted not only through material inheritance, but also through the intangible impact on social perception. Letters and diary entries from European acquaintances describe a woman of sharp intellect, elegance, and discretion, whose presence inspired loyalty and respect. She became an early model of what some scholars now term strategic female agency, navigating patriarchal systems without overt confrontation, yet fundamentally reshaping outcomes in her favor. Her life challenges assumptions about the limitations of women in history, offering a narrative that is both inspiring and unsettling, a story of calculated moral complexity. Ultimately, Elellanena Villar's story remains a testament to resilience, intelligence, and courage in the face of systemic injustice. From the sweltering plantations of New Orleans to the salons of Paris, she maneuvered through danger, deception, and societal expectation to secure not only her freedom, but her place in history. Her careful orchestration of escape, her preservation of innocent lives, and her subsequent establishment of a stable, influential life in Europe reflect a woman who refused to be victimized, choosing instead to become the author of her own destiny. In doing so, she left behind a legacy that continues to challenge, fascinate, and inspire those who study the intersections of power, morality, and human will.